The Indian Removal Act of 1830 stands as one of the most devastating chapters in American history. Signed into law by President Andrew Jackson on May 28, 1830, this legislation gave the federal government the authority to negotiate land exchange treaties with Native American tribes living in the southeastern United States. While the law was framed as a voluntary relocation policy, in practice, it became a mechanism for forced removal, coercion, and violence. The act specifically targeted tribes such as the Cherokee, Choctaw, Chickasaw, Creek, and Seminole, collectively known as the Five Civilized Tribes, who had adopted many aspects of European American culture, including farming, schooling, and even written constitutions. Despite their efforts to coexist peacefully with white settlers, these tribes were pressured to cede millions of acres of their ancestral homelands in states like Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee, lands that settlers coveted for agriculture and resource exploitation. Andrew Jackson, a military hero and the 7th President of the United States, framed the act as a benevolent measure meant to protect Native Americans from encroaching settlers. Jackson claimed that moving tribes west of the Mississippi River would preserve their culture and way of life. However, his rhetoric masked a harsh reality. The federal government lacked sufficient oversight to ensure voluntary compliance, and state governments, particularly Georgia, aggressively enforced removal through laws that undermined tribal sovereignty. The Supreme Court even ruled in Worcester v. Georgia 1832 that Georgia had no legal authority over Cherokee lands, but Jackson reportedly refused to enforce the decision, famously stating, "John Marshall has made his decision. Now let him enforce it," though historians debate the exact wording. Regardless, the ruling had little practical effect, and the Cherokee and other tribes faced relentless pressure from both state authorities and settlers. The process of removal was neither swift nor humane. The Choctaw were among the first to be forcibly relocated in 1831, enduring a treacherous journey of over 500 miles under harsh winter conditions, inadequate supplies, and disease outbreaks. Thousands died from starvation, exposure, and illness. The Cherokee faced a similar fate during the infamous Trail of Tears between 1838 and 1839. Approximately 16,000 Cherokee were rounded up by federal troops and forced to march from Georgia to present-day Oklahoma, a journey of over 1,000 miles. Along the way, nearly 4,000 Cherokee perished due to cold, disease, and exhaustion. Families were separated, homes were destroyed, and generations of cultural knowledge were disrupted. The term Trail of Tears captures not only the physical suffering endured during the forced relocations but also the profound emotional and spiritual loss experienced by the Native American communities. The economic motivations behind the Indian Removal Act cannot be overlooked. Southern states were eager to expand cotton production and profit from fertile lands previously inhabited by Native Americans. Politically, Jackson and his supporters framed the policy as a compromise between the interests of settlers and the needs of Native Americans, presenting removal as a practical solution to avoid conflict. However, the act disproportionately benefited white settlers and the emerging plantation economy at the expense of indigenous lives and sovereignty. Tribal lands were seized, treaties were often coerced or ignored, and Native Americans were pushed into regions ill-suited for agriculture or settlement, creating long-term hardships that reverberated for generations. Resistance to the Indian Removal Act existed, both within the Native American communities and among sympathetic Americans. The Cherokee, for instance, developed a written language under Sequoyah, maintained schools, newspapers, and legal institutions, and filed lawsuits to defend their lands in U.S. courts. The Choctaw and Creek also organized to negotiate the best possible terms under the relentless pressure of federal and state governments. Despite these efforts, resistance could not overcome the combined forces of the U.S. military, state militias, and federal policy. Individual acts of defiance, such as the Seminole Wars in Florida, delayed removal but ultimately could not prevent it. The human cost was staggering, leaving scars on tribal populations and eroding cultural and social structures that had flourished for centuries. The Indian Removal Act had lasting implications for the United States. It set a precedent for federal and state policies aimed at displacing indigenous populations for economic gain. The act contributed to a pattern of broken treaties, legal manipulation, and forced assimilation that would continue throughout the 19th century, from reservations to boarding schools. The psychological and cultural trauma inflicted upon the Five Civilized Tribes resonates today, shaping contemporary discussions on indigenous rights, land restitution, and historical accountability. Beyond immediate suffering, the removals disrupted traditional governance, trade networks, and spiritual practices, creating long-term challenges for tribal communities attempting to preserve their heritage. Historians debate Andrew Jackson's motives and legacy in relation to the Indian Removal Act. Some argue that Jackson genuinely believed relocation was in the tribe's best interests, protecting them from annihilation by settler expansion. Others contend that the policy reflects a ruthless prioritization of settler interests, political gain, and racialized ideologies that viewed Native Americans as obstacles to progress. Regardless of intent, the consequences were undeniable. Thousands dead, countless families displaced, and a legacy of injustice that remains a central element of U.S. history education. The story of the Indian Removal Act is both a cautionary tale of governmental overreach and a reminder of the resilience and strength of indigenous peoples. Visual storytelling for this history is vital. Maps depicting the ancestral homelands and relocation routes, illustrations of tribal life before removal, and archival images or drawings of the forced marshes can help audiences connect emotionally to the human experiences behind the policy. Close-ups of key figures like Andrew Jackson, tribal leaders such as John Ross of the Cherokee, and depictions of the Five Tribes' cultural achievements enrich understanding. Footage or animation of winter landscapes can evoke the harsh environmental conditions faced during forced relocations, while charts showing mortality rates and distances traveled provide concrete context to the staggering human cost. Educational impact is another key focus. Explaining the legal battles such as Worcester v. Georgia and the political mechanisms behind the Indian Removal Act allows viewers to appreciate the complexity of 19th century U.S. policy, highlighting resistance efforts from tribal diplomacy to military action. Emphasizes that Native Americans were active agents defending their rights rather than passive victims. Personal narratives, letters, and oral histories can humanize statistics, giving audiences a window into lived experiences of suffering, resilience, and cultural survival. Understanding the Indian Removal Act also provides a lens for examining broader themes of justice, sovereignty, and ethics in governance. The tension between federal authority, state power, and indigenous rights demonstrates how legal frameworks can be wielded to benefit some groups at the expense of others. By analyzing the socio-political climate of the 1830s, including economic pressures, partisan politics, and racial attitudes, viewers gain insight into why such policies were enacted and how they were justified to the American public at the time. In summary, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 represents a pivotal moment in U.S. history, marked by broken promises, forced marshes, and devastating consequences for indigenous peoples. It reveals the interplay of policy, power, and prejudice, while also highlighting the courage and endurance of Native American communities who survived and adapted despite tremendous adversity. By studying this episode, we not only honor the memory of those affected, but also learn valuable lessons about justice, advocacy, and the ongoing need to acknowledge historical wrongs. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel. We'd also love to hear from you. Comment below and let us know if there's a topic you'd like us to explore next.